Okay, thanks. So my name is Ayala Wineman. I work with the Global Child Nutrition Foundation. I'll be talking today about the results from Africa from the 2019 Global Survey of School Meal Programs. But before diving into these results, let me offer some context so you understand the rationale and the motivation for the survey. Back in 2018, the Global Child Nutrition Foundation, GCNF, conducted a survey of the information available on school feeding programs in every country in the world. And what we found was that the quantity and quality of information available on school feeding was extremely inconsistent across countries, and even across different programs operating within the same country. We were much more likely to find detailed information for programs implemented by an external agency like the World Food Program, rather than programs that are wholly implemented by national governments. And the information was not collected and published regularly over the years. So the landscape of information on school feeding worldwide was very scattered, and there were a lot of gaps. There was a real need for a more standardized and systematic approach to collecting and disseminating data. For this reason, the Global Child Nutrition Foundation launched in 2019 a global survey of school meal programs. This is a survey that gathers information on the scope of school feeding in each country in the world in the most recently completed school year. It captures information on government involvement in school feeding, topics related to gender, nutrition, and education, links to agriculture and private sector engagement, some other topics around health, sanitation, employment, and the impact of emergencies, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. The Global Survey of School Meal Programs gathers information at both the country level and the level of each large-scale school feeding program operating in the country. And the survey is designed to be answered by a government representative, what we call a survey focal point. So members of our survey team are stationed where you see these red stars, and they work with African governments to help them complete the survey so that the school feeding activities in their country are accurately represented in the database that is produced with the survey. And so the outcome of the survey is a unique global database of standardized information on school feeding programs and covering a broad set of related topics. All right, now focusing specifically on Africa, the 2019 global survey drew responses from 41 countries in Africa, representing 82% of the continent's population. So on this map, the countries that are in green are those for which we have information. And of these, 39 countries had some large-scale school feeding going on, and they provided detailed information on 68 different school feeding programs. Across the 41 countries that responded to the survey in Africa, we're able to estimate with the greatest accuracy possible that over 60 million children received food through their schools. Mostly this refers to the year 2017-2018. And specifically for sub-Saharan Africa, that value is 48 million. But with the data, we're able to document that school feeding program coverage tended to be lowest where needs were greatest. So by school feeding coverage, I'm referring to the share of school-age children in the country who receive food through schools. And when you take an average across countries, the average value is 23% in Africa, but countries that are classified as low income have lower school feeding coverage on average, and those that are in lower middle income and upper middle income categories have much higher rates of school feeding coverage. Using the data set that is drawn from the survey, we document a correlation between coverage rates and countries having school feeding as a national budget line item. So countries in Africa that have school feeding as a line item on their national budget have a higher average coverage rate than the group of countries without school feeding as a line item. When it comes to policy, we note that many African countries do have national school feeding policies. 44% have policies related to food safety within school feeding programs. And it's very uncommon to see policies related to private sector engagement. When it comes to what foods are served in school meals or in snacks or take-home rations, we noted that the most diverse menus were observed in, it was Nigeria and Zimbabwe, and the least diverse school meal menus were observed in Libya and Egypt. But the avenue through which food is procured has a big implication for the diversity of the menu available to school children. Specifically, menus were more diverse when food was procured through domestic purchase. So we categorized school feeding programs across the continent based on whether they seemed to rely on in-kind donations of food from foreign countries, or they rely on domestic procurement. And what this graph shows is that while all programs serve children grains and cereals, most serve them oil, salt. When it comes to other items like fish, fruits and vegetables, meat and eggs, we are much more likely to see these other items being available to children if the program procured food domestically. When it comes to an objective to meet nutritional goals, school feeding programs in Africa follow several, they pursue several ends. They often include fortified foods on the school meal menu. It's somewhat less likely to observe micronutrient supplements being offered to children. Of note, it's very rare for school feeding programs to state an objective to reduce obesity as one of the objectives of the school feeding program. So I think that's kind of ties into some of the topics that others have brought up today. And the last result I'll share with you from the survey, although there is a much larger set of information available, across the 41 African countries that responded to the survey, the aggregate school feeding budget was on the order of $1.3 billion US. And when we take an average across countries, the average share of this school feeding budget that comes from government is 45%. So this graph shows the breakdown of funding sources for school feeding for each country for which we have data. And those with green, a lot of green in the bar, they rely mostly on government funding. The survey asked focal points to share information on both successes and challenges related to school feeding in their countries. I'll zip right through these in the interest of time. Successes, local procurement of food items was celebrated, as was a wider increasing diversity of food items and the passage of national legislation in support of school feeding. Among the challenges, far and away the most common challenge noted, in fact, universally in Africa, inadequate and unpredictable budgets for school feeding programs. But some other difficulties noted included difficulties related to supply chains, strained infrastructure, and insufficient human resources, among other challenges. So the Global Child Nutrition Foundation website includes, for each country that responded to the survey, a country report that details what's happening with school feeding in that country. We have some other resources like a report. The data set itself is available to the public. If anybody feels they can make use of it, it is available to you. And the 2021 data collection is now underway. So we hope to have a new set of data, perhaps with more universal coverage in a few months. Feedback and questions are very welcome.